The corridors of the Celestial Spire Academy hummed with the low thrum of anti-gravity lifts and the chatter of 100 species. Their voices a symphony of clicks, trills, and modulated tones that only the universal translators embedded in every student's collar could harmonize into something resembling common speech. Among them, Lyra Vex drifted like a shard of winter sky, tall, elegant, with luminous blue skin that shimmered faintly under the Academy's bioluminescent lighting, and hair like spun moonlight cascading past her shoulders. Her eyes, large and opalescent, missed nothing, especially not the boy who always sat alone in the back of Xenolinguistics. His posture slumped as if gravity pulled harder on him than on the rest of them. His name was Joran Vale, and to Lyra he was the epitome of everything dull and earthbound, literally. He was human, from Sol 3, a planet so obscure most students had to look it up in the galactic registry just to place it. To Lyra, that made him a curiosity at best, a joke at worst. She never missed a chance to remind him of it. During zero-gravity combat drills, she'd flick a stray energy pulse in his direction just to watch him fumble. In synesthetic art class, when students were asked to paint their homeworld's emotional resonance, she'd projected a swirling vortex of cosmic dread over his timid watercolor of rolling green hills and called it the sigh of a dying rock. The other students, avian Xentherans with iridescent feathers, hulking Grulvik with chitinous plates, even the soft-spoken Lumini who communicated through scent, would laugh, not because they disliked Joran, but because Lyra Vex was brilliant, beautiful, and ruthless, and it was easier to follow her than to question her. Joran never retaliated. He'd just lower his eyes, tuck his worn datapad under his arm, and walk away with that quiet, infuriating dignity that somehow made her mockery feel cheap, even as she delivered it. It wasn't until the Interstellar Heritage Festival that things began to unravel. The festival was a grand tradition at the Celestial Spire, a week-long celebration where students showcased artifacts, stories, and customs from their home systems. Lyra had prepared a stunning holographic reenactment of the Great Nebula Convergence on her homeworld of Signara, a celestial event so rare it occurred once every 10,000 cycles and was said to awaken dormant psychic abilities in her people. She stood proudly beside her display, surrounded by admirers, when she noticed Joran setting up his own modest station across the hall. He'd brought a simple wooden box, polished smooth by time, and inside it rested a collection of oddities. A smooth river stone, a rusted key, a faded photograph of two people smiling under a yellow sun, and a small, dented metal disc etched with strange symbols. Curious despite herself, and perhaps a little bored with the fawning praise, Lyra drifted over. "Let me guess," she said, voice laced with honeyed condescension. "This is your planet's most advanced technology? A rock and a broken toy." Joran didn't look up. "It's not technology," he said quietly. "It's memory." "Memory doesn't power starships," she retorted, folding her arms. "It doesn't shield cities from solar flares or decode quantum entanglements. Your species clings to sentiment like a crutch because you've never evolved beyond it." For the first time, Joran met her gaze. His eyes were brown, unremarkable by galactic standards, but there was something in them that made her pause. Not anger, not shame, something deeper, older. "You think evolution is only about power?" he asked. "Maybe it's also about knowing when to hold on." Before she could reply, a commotion erupted near the main atrium. A delegation from the Cthar Collective, reptilian diplomats known for their rigid honor codes and volatile tempers, had arrived unannounced. Their leader, a scarred elder named Vraktol, strode into the hall with a retinue of armored envoys. The headmaster hurried to greet them, but Vraktol's eyes scanned the room until they locked onto Joran's display. His forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, snatching the metal disc from the box. "This artifact," he hissed, voice crackling through the translator, "belongs to the Cthar. It was stolen during the Sol conflict. Return it, or face the wrath of the Blood Oath." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Sol conflict was ancient history, a brief, brutal skirmish centuries ago between early human explorers and Cthar expansion fleets, long before humanity had even mastered warp travel. Most scholars considered it a footnote, but the Cthar never forgot a slight and never forgave a theft. Joran stepped forward, calm but firm. "That's not stolen. It's a family heirloom. My great-grandfather found it in the ruins of an old research outpost on Mars. There were no Cthar there, only human scientists." "Lies!" Vraktol roared, his scales flaring crimson. "That disc is a fragment of the Sky Singer stone, a sacred relic shattered in battle. Its resonance calls to our bloodline. You hold it without right." Tension crackled in the air. Security drones hovered at the edge of the hall, but the headmaster raised a hand. They couldn't intervene in matters of ancestral honor without risking interstellar incident. Lyra watched, arms still crossed, expecting Joran to back down, to apologize, to do what humans always did, yield. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, palm-sized device, a battered old Earth model resonator, the kind used in archaeological digs. He placed the disc on its surface and activated it. A low, haunting hum filled the hall, vibrating through the floor, resonating in the bones of everyone present. But it wasn't just sound, it was meaning. Images flickered in the air. A desert under twin moons, a temple carved into a crimson cliff, a ritual where Cthar warriors knelt before a glowing monolith. And then, abruptly, the scene shifted. A human ship, small and fragile, crash-landing on a barren moon. Survivors scavenging ruins. One man, Joran's ancestor, finding the disc half-buried in ash, not as a trophy, but as a mystery. The resonance changed again. Now it showed something else. Not Cthar glyphs, but human symbols, coordinates, dates, a star map leading not to Cthar space, but to a dead system near the galactic rim. And beneath it, etched in faded ink on the disc's edge, were words in Old Terran English. For those who come after, remember us. Vraktol staggered back as if struck. This cannot be, he whispered. The Sky Singer stone was ours alone. No, Joran said gently. It was never yours. It was theirs, the ones who built the temple you claimed as your own. The ones your ancestors conquered and erased. You didn't inherit it. You took it. Silence fell like a shroud. Even the ambient hum of the academy seemed to hush. Lyra felt something shift inside her. Not just surprise, but shame. She had mocked Joran for clinging to the past, yet he carried a truth so vast it dwarfed her entire lineage. The Cthar had built their identity on a lie, and this quiet human boy had just exposed it with a rock and a memory. Vraktol's eyes burned with fury and confusion. You will pay for this insult, he snarled, drawing a ceremonial blade from his belt. Human blood will cleanse this dishonor. Before anyone could react, he lunged. Joran didn't flinch, but Lyra moved. Instinct overrode pride. She threw herself between them, her slender frame braced, her own wrist blade, a family heirloom of crystalline Signoran steel, snapping into place with a sharp shink. The Ctharis blade met hers in a shower of sparks. The force of the impact sent tremors up her arm, but she held firm. Touch him, she said, voice low and dangerous. And you answer to House Vex. The crowd gasped again. House Vex was one of the oldest noble lines in the Signoran Concord, a dynasty of diplomats, warriors, and seers. To invoke her house was to declare this no longer a schoolyard spat, but a matter of interstellar consequence. Vraktol hesitated. He knew the name. Slowly, he lowered his blade, but his eyes remained locked on Joran. This is not over, he hissed. The blood oath demands balance, and balance will be paid in time. He turned and strode out, his envoys following like shadows. The tension bled from the hall, replaced by a stunned murmur. Students stared at Joran as if seeing him for the first time, not as a backward earthling, but as someone who carried secrets the galaxy had forgotten. Lyra deactivated her blade and turned to Joran. She expected gratitude. Instead, he just looked tired. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, she replied, her voice softer than she intended. But I was wrong about you. He gave a small, sad smile. You weren't wrong about Earth being insignificant. It is small, fragile. But that's why we remember. Because if we don't, no one else will. Later that night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She replayed the resonance in her mind. The images, the weight of lost civilizations, the quiet courage in Joran's voice. She accessed the Academy's deep archives, cross-referencing the coordinates from the disk. What she found chilled her. The star system it pointed to wasn't just dead. It had been erased. Official records listed it as uninhabitable void. But buried in encrypted military logs from the first expansion era was a single entry. Project Mnemosyne terminated. All personnel lost. Memory core jettisoned. Do not recover. Mnemosyne, the ancient Terran word for memory. She found Joran the next morning in the Academy's observation dome, staring out at the swirling nebula beyond the glass. She didn't mock, didn't preen, just stood beside him, her blue skin glowing faintly in the starlight. Your ancestor, she said after a long pause. He wasn't just a scavenger, was he? Joran shook his head. He was part of a secret mission, humanity's first attempt to preserve knowledge, not just their own but everyone's. They called it the Memory Vault. They gathered fragments of extinct cultures, dying languages, forgotten gods. The disk is a key, or part of one. And the Kthar. They think it's a weapon, or a title. They don't understand. None of them do. He turned to her, eyes searching. But you felt it, didn't you? In the resonance. She nodded. It wasn't just sound. It was grief and hope. Exactly, he said. And someone out there is still protecting the vault. Someone who doesn't want it found. Or maybe someone who's waiting for the right people to find it. Lyra looked at him, really looked. Not as a human, not as an earthling, but as Joran Vale. Keeper of lost worlds, son of a forgotten mission, bearer of a legacy that stretched across time and species. And for the first time she felt not superiority, but awe. What do we do now? She asked. He smiled, a real one this time. We follow the map. But as they turned to leave the dome, alarms blared through the academy. Red lights pulsed along the corridors. A synthesized voice echoed, "Security breach in Sector Gamma. Unauthorized vessel detected in orbit. All students to lockdown." Lyra's blood ran cold. She knew that ship signature. It wasn't Kthar. It was something older, sleeker, silent. The kind of vessel that didn't appear on any registry. Joran's face went pale. "They found us," he whispered. "Who?" she demanded. "The ones who erased Mnemosyne," he said. "The ones who don't want the past to speak." Outside, the stars seemed to dim as a shadow passed over the moon. The game had changed. No longer was this about schoolyard taunts or ancestral pride. This was about survival, of memory, of truth, of everything that made a civilization more than just power and conquest. Lyra grabbed Joran's hand. Her fingers, cool and smooth, closed around his warm, calloused ones. "Then we run," she said. "But not like cowards. Like seekers." And as the lockdown sirens wailed and the academy's shields flickered to life, two students, one blue-skinned and luminous, the other human and unassuming, slipped into the maintenance tunnels beneath the celestial spire, carrying with them not just a disk, but the echo of 1,000 lost voices, and the fragile hope that someone, somewhere, still cared enough to listen. The maintenance tunnels beneath the celestial spire academy twisted like the veins of some ancient leviathan, damp with condensation and humming with the pulse of hidden machinery. Lyra led the way, her white hair catching faint glimmers from emergency strips embedded in the walls, her movements swift and sure, Signoran nobility trained for evasion as much as diplomacy. Joran followed close behind, clutching the metal disc inside a shielded pouch woven from his grandmother's old thermal blanket, its resonance now muted but still thrumming faintly against his ribs like a second heartbeat. They hadn't spoken since escaping the dome, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was charged with fear, yes, but also with something new. A fragile trust, stitched together in the span of a single day. Lyra kept glancing back, not to check if he was keeping up, but to make sure he was still there, still real. And Joran, for his part, found himself watching the way her blue skin shimmered under stress, how her pointed ears twitched at every distant alarm, how she never once hesitated, even when the path forked into darkness. They emerged near the Academy's derelict hangar bay, a relic from the early days of the Spire, long abandoned after a plasma surge fried its navigation arrays. Dust motes danced in the slanted light filtering through cracked viewports. Parked in the far corner, half hidden under a tarp woven from solar-dampening mesh, was Lyra's personal skiff. The Whisper Wing, a sleek, needle-nosed vessel with Signoran glyphs etched along its hull and a cloaking module her father had forbidden her to use. "You stole your own ship?" Joran asked, eyebrows raised. "I liberated it," she corrected, tapping the access panel. The hatch hissed open. "Technically, it's still in my name. My father just misplaced the authorization codes." He couldn't help but smile. "You're terrible at lying. And you're surprisingly good at noticing," she shot back. But there was no bite in it. Only warmth, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Inside, the cockpit glowed with soft amber light. Lyra powered up the systems with practiced ease, her fingers dancing over the controls. "We can't go to any registered port," she said, voice low. "Whoever's after you, after us, has eyes everywhere. Even the Concorde surveillance net might be compromised." Joran pulled up a star chart on the secondary display. "Then we go where no one looks." He traced a line toward the Mnemosyne coordinates. "There's a dead zone near the Shattered Belt, Gravitational anomalies, ion storms, the works. Perfect for hiding. Lyra nodded, engaging the thrusters. The Whisper Wing lifted silently, its cloaking field rippling into place like water over glass. As they breached the atmosphere, the Academy shrank below them, a glittering spire of knowledge and lies, while above, the intruder ship hung in orbit like a black fong against the stars. It didn't pursue. It didn't need to. It knew they'd run, and it knew where they were going. 3 days into the void, the disk began to sing again. Not audibly, no sound could travel in vacuum, but through the ship's neural interface, which Lyra had jury-rigged to sync with Joran's resonator. Images flooded the cockpit display. Not just ruins now, but people. A humanoid species with silver eyes and 6-fingered hands, building cities from living crystal. A cephalopod race painting symphonies onto nebulae with bioluminescent ink. And at the center of it all, a massive orbital archive, Mnemosyne Prime, spinning silently in the shadow of a collapsed star. They weren't just preserving culture, Joran whispered, awestruck. They were archiving souls. Lyra's hands tightened on the controls. And someone destroyed it. Not the Kthar. Someone far worse. As if summoned by the thought, the ship's proximity alert blared. A vessel dropped out of warp directly ahead. Sleek, obsidian, bearing no insignia, no registry, no emission signature. Just presence. The kind of ship that didn't exist unless it wanted to. They're here, Lyra said, jaw set. Joran activated the disk's full resonance. This time, it didn't just show memories, it reacted. The Whisperwing systems flickered, then stabilized in a way that defied physics. Navigation rerouted itself. Shields flared with an unknown energy frequency, and the cloaking field deepened, folding space around them like origami. What's happening? Lyra gasped. The disk isn't just a key, Joran realized. It's a beacon. And Mnemosyne, it's still alive. The obsidian ship fired, not with plasma or railguns, but with silence. A wave of null energy that erased data, scrambled neural links, and dissolved matter at the quantum level. But the Whisper Wing slipped through it like smoke, guided by the disk's ancient intelligence. They plunged into the shattered belt, weaving through asteroid fields that pulsed with residual chronoton radiation. Time itself frayed at the edges here. Lyra flew like a phantom, her instincts honed by generations of star navigators. Joran monitored the disk's pulses, calling out course corrections that made no logical sense but somehow worked. In the quiet moments between near misses, they talked. Really talked. Joran told her about Earth, about rain that smelled like petrichor, about music that could make you cry without words, about how humans built libraries not because they were strong, but because they were afraid of forgetting. Lyra spoke of Signara, of ice forests that sang in the wind, of memory weavers who could stitch dreams into tapestries, of how her people believed that to forget was to die twice. And somewhere between the asteroid storms and the ghost echoes of dead civilizations, something shifted. Not with grand declarations or dramatic confessions, but in the way their hands brushed when reaching for the same control, in the way they saved each other's rations without being asked, in the quiet understanding that they were no longer just fugitives, they were partners. Then came the twist. Deep in the belt, they found it. Mnemosyne Prime. Not destroyed, but dormant, wrapped in a stasis field older than most galaxies. As the Whisperwing docked with the derelict station, the disk flared with blinding light, and a voice echoed in their minds, neither male nor female, ancient yet intimate. Welcome, Keeper, and unexpected guest. The station's core chamber unfolded before them. A vast, spherical archive filled with floating memory crystals, each containing a civilization's final breath. At its center hovered a humanoid figure, translucent, shifting, made of light and data. The archivist. You are not alone, it said, turning its gaze to Lyra. Your bloodline carries a resonance I have not sensed in 10,000 cycles. Lyra froze. What do you mean? The archivist projected an image. A Signoran woman, clad in starlight robes, standing beside a human man in an old Earth uniform, placing the first memory crystal into the archive. Your ancestor, Silra Vex, was Mnemosyne's co-founder. She foresaw the coming purge. She hid the truth in plain sight, encoded in Signoran lullabies, in diplomatic seals, in the very structure of your DNA. Lyra staggered back, stunned. Her family hadn't just been diplomats, they'd been guardians. And her mockery of Joran, it had been a betrayal of her own legacy. Before she could process it, alarms shrieked through the station. The obsidian ship had breached the stasis field. They're not mercenaries, Joran realized, eyes wide. They're eradicators. A faction that believes memory is dangerous, that forgetting is the only path to peace. The archivist's form flickered. They seek to collapse Mnemosyne into a singularity, to erase all that was, so nothing can ever be again. Lyra turned to Joran, tears glistening in her opalescent eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. He took her hand. We fix it. Together. But as they raced toward the core's control nexus, a new horror awaited. The lead eradicator stepped from the shadows. Not a faceless drone, but a man. Human. Mid-40s, with Joran's same brown eyes and stubborn jaw. Hello, son, he said softly. Joran's blood turned to ice. Dad. His father, Commander Eris Vale, declared dead in the Titan outpost disaster 15 years ago, stood before him, clad in eradicator armor, his expression torn between love and duty. I didn't want you to find this place, Eris said. I tried to keep you safe on Earth, but you were always too curious. Too much like your mother. Mom knew about this? Joran choked out. She was the last keeper before me, Eris said. When the Eradicator Council rose within Mnemosyne's own ranks, she hid the disk with your family. I joined them to destroy them from within. But the longer I stayed, the more I believed their cause. Memory is pain, Joran. Look at what it's done to us. To Lyra's people. To the Kthar. To everyone. Lyra stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. Memory is also love. And courage. And the reason we don't repeat our mistakes. Eris looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment, the hardness in his eyes cracked. Maybe, he said. But the council is already here. They've activated the collapse sequence. In 10 minutes, Mnemosyne will be gone. And with it, every memory it holds. Joran turned to the archivist. Is there a way to stop it? There is one, it replied. But it requires a sacrifice. 2 bloodlines, human and Signoran, must merge their resonance at the core. Not just physically, spiritually, soul to soul. Only then can the archive be reignited, and the Eradicator's link severed. Lyra and Joran exchanged a glance. No words were needed. They'd already been moving toward this moment since the day they met. Not as enemies, not even as friends, but as 2 halves of a forgotten promise. As Eris watched, conflicted, they stepped into the core chamber, hands clasped. The disk floated between them, glowing brighter than ever. Light enveloped them, not burning but knowing. Memories surged. Earth's first sunrise, Signara's ice forest singing. 1,000 civilizations laughing, weeping, loving, dying. And through it all, a single truth echoed. To remember is to live. Outside, the Eradicator fleet prepared to fire. Inside, something ancient began to wake. But just as the resonance peaked, Eris made his choice. He turned on his own people, overloading the Eradicator ship's core. Go! He shouted over the comms. Finish it. I'll hold them off. The explosion lit the shattered belt like a second sun. Back in the core, Lyra and Joran collapsed into each other's arms, exhausted but alive. The archive pulsed with renewed life, its light spreading across the galaxy like a whispered secret. The Eradicator Council's connection shattered. Mnemosyne was safe, for now, because as the Whisper Wing fled the belt, carrying the 2 of them and the reborn archive's first new memory. Theirs. A final transmission crackled through the void, encrypted in a code older than stars. The Keepers have returned. The war for memory begins anew. And somewhere in the dark, a fleet of obsidian ships turned toward the signal. Not to destroy, but to hunt. Lyra leaned her head on Joran's shoulder as the stars streaked past. What do we do now? He kissed her temple, the blue of her skin cool against his lips. We remember, and we run. But this time they weren't running away. They were running toward something vast, uncertain, and worth fighting for. Together. The war for memory did not end in a single battle, nor was it won with a final strike. It unfolded across decades, sometimes in the silent corridors of forgotten archives, sometimes in the blazing heart of rebel-held star systems, often in the quiet courage of those who chose to remember when forgetting would have been easier. Lyra and Joran became more than fugitives. They became legends. The Blue Seer of Signara and the Earthborn Keeper, names whispered in resistance cells from the molten rings of Vexus Prime to the drowned cities of Oceanus 9. They rebuilt Mnemosyne not as a vault, but as a living network, a constellation of memory seeds hidden in lullabies, encoded in starlight, woven into the very fabric of interstellar culture. And always, at its heart, was their bond, the human and the alien, the rememberer and the awakened. They never sought thrones or titles. Power, they learned, was fleeting. Memory was eternal. Instead, they traveled, sometimes as scholars, sometimes as smugglers, once as street performers on a backwater moon where Lyra played haunting melodies on a flute carved from Mnemosyne crystal while Joran told stories of civilizations no one else recalled. Their love deepened not in grand declarations, but in shared silences, in the way Joran always saved the last bite of synth pastry for her, in how Lyra would hum old Signoran cradle songs when Joran's nightmares returned, echoes of Eradicator raids and his father's final sacrifice. And then, against all odds, they chose to settle. Not on Earth, too fragile, too watched. Not on Signara, too entangled in noble politics. Instead, they found a world on the fringes of known space, orbiting a gentle red dwarf star. They called it Evora, from an ancient Terran word meaning forever morning. It was a planet of rolling violet hills, silver-leafed forests, and twin moons that cast overlapping shadows like woven lace. There, far from galactic courts and Eradicator remnants, they built a home. It began as a single dome of recycled chip alloy and memory crystal panels that shimmered with soft light. Then came a garden, earth tomatoes growing beside Signoran moonblooms, their roots tangled in soil mixed from 100 worlds. Then a schoolhouse where children of all species came to learn not just facts, but stories. How the Grulvik once sang their dead into the stars, how the Lumini painted emotions with scent, how humans built libraries out of love for what they might lose. And children came, their children. First, Kira, born with Lyra's luminous blue skin and Joran's stubborn chin, her eyes shifting from opal to amber depending on her mood. She could hum a frequency that made flowers bloom out of season. Then came Milo, with tousled white hair like his mother's but warm brown skin like his father's, who could recite the history of extinct civilizations before he could tie his shoes. Then twins, Soren and Lyra, who spoke in perfect unison until age 7, when they decided it was too predictable. They were followed by 3 more, each a mosaic of earth and Signara, of memory and hope. Their home was never quiet. It echoed with laughter, arguments over who got the last synth cake, bedtime stories that stretched into dawn, and the occasional minor explosion from Milo's historical reenactment experiments. Lyra taught them to weave memory tapestries. Joran taught them to plant gardens that remembered the seasons of dead worlds. They celebrated Earth birthdays with cake and Signoran naming days with starlight rituals. And every evening, no matter how tired, they gathered under the twin moons to share one memory from their day, good, bad, or absurd. The galaxy changed around them. The Eradicator Council fractured, its ideology crumbling under the weight of its own emptiness. New alliances formed, not based on power, but on shared remembrance. Mnemosyne's network grew, not as a weapon, but as a quiet pulse beneath the skin of civilization, reminding everyone that to forget was to lose oneself. Lyra's hair turned from moonlight white to silver, then to a soft, luminous gray. Joran's hands grew lined, his steps slower, but his eyes never lost their spark. They still argued about whether Terran jazz or Signoran resonance chants made better lullabies. They compromised with both. They still danced in the garden during meteor showers. And every year, on the anniversary of their escape from the Celestial Spire, they'd take the Whisper Wing, now patched and retrofitted a dozen times, out past the asteroid belt and just float, holding hands, watching the stars remember them back. Their children grew. Kira became an archivist, traveling to recover lost memory seeds from war-torn systems. Milo founded a university on Evora dedicated to cross-cultural storytelling. The twins opened a galactic cafe where every dish came with a story from a different world. And all of them returned home often, bringing grandchildren who called Lyra Grandma Sky and Joran Papa Earth. One evening, when the twin moons hung low and the silver leaves shimmered like liquid, Lyra and Joran sat on their porch, wrapped in a blanket woven from their wedding robes, blue and brown threads intertwined. Their hands, gnarled with age but still familiar, rested together on the armrest. "Do you ever miss it?" Lyra asked softly. "The running, the danger, the stars calling us?" Joran smiled, his voice a warm rasp. "I missed the adventure, but not the fear, not the not knowing if we'd see tomorrow." He squeezed her hand. This is the memory I always wanted to keep." She leaned her head on his shoulder, her blue skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Me too." They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. Around them, the house hummed with life, grandchildren laughing in the garden, a memory crystal softly playing an old Terran lullaby, the scent of moon blooms and earth basil mingling in the air. The galaxy spun on, vast and sometimes cruel. But here, on this quiet world at the edge of everything, love had built something the Eradicators could never destroy. A legacy not of power, but of remembrance. Years later, when they were gone, Lyra first, in her sleep, with Joran's name on her lips. Joran 2 winters after, smiling as he watched the first snow of the season fall on Avora's violet hills. Their children buried them beneath the oldest moonbloom tree, its roots deep in soil from Earth, Signara, Mars, and 100 other worlds. They placed no stone, no monument. Instead, they planted a new memory crystal in the earth, tuned to their parents' voices, their laughter, the sound of their hands brushing as they walked through the garden. And every evening, as the twin moons rose, the crystal would hum softly. A lullaby, a story, a promise. Remember us, it seemed to say, and keep remembering each other. And across the galaxy, in classrooms and starships and quiet homes, people did. Not because they were ordered to, but because Lyra and Joran had shown them that memory wasn't just about the past. It was the seed of every future worth living. And so, in the end, the girl who once mocked a human boy for clinging to a rock from a forgotten world became the woman who taught the galaxy how to hold on. And the boy who carried his ancestors' silence became the man who gave the stars a voice. Together, they didn't just survive. They remembered. They loved. And in doing so, they made the universe a little less lonely. In their final years, Lyra and Joran watched their children and grandchildren fill Avora with laughter, stories, and gardens that bloomed with memories from 100 worlds. Their home, once a single dome, became a village of light and learning, where every visitor left with a story and took one with them. Lyra's hair silvered like starlight, Joran's steps slowed, but their hands never stopped finding each other. They celebrated quiet birthdays, danced under twin moons, and still argued over music, though they always fell asleep to both. When Lyra passed first, she did so smiling, whispering Joran's name like a lullaby. He followed 2 winters later, watching snow dust the violet hills, eyes full of peace. They were buried beneath the moonbloom tree, roots tangled with earth soil and Signaran ice. No grand monument marked their rest, only a memory crystal that hummed their favorite lullaby at dusk. Their legacy lived not in statues, but in classrooms where children learned to honor the past without fear, in starships that carried stories like seeds across the dark, in lovers who held hands and chose remembrance over forgetting. The galaxy never forgot the Blue Seer and the Earthborn Keeper, not as warriors, but as weavers of hope. And on quiet nights, if you listened closely, the wind through Avora's silver leaves sounded like laughter, hers bright and sharp, his warm and steady. Together, even in silence, they echoed. Because love, like memory, never truly ends, it only changes form.